Carla. Welcome back to the Written Word Calligraphy channel. Today I wanted to answer some of your questions about our muted collection line for inks. So we created this line because I personally found as a wedding calligrapher that often people were asking me if I could get a light gray or a taupe color or a dusty rose shade ink, and normally I would have to create this own ink myself using gouache, and I just felt that the consistency was never really there, and there's always the question of waterproofness even if I would put a fixative on it. So I decided to collaborate with Dr. P.H. Martin's, which is an amazing ink brand that I personally use a lot. I love their metallic color line, and was to be able to develop these very special pastel muted color inks that are perfect straight from the bottle, and they are waterproof and smudge proof, perfect for our calligraphy projects use. So a lot of you guys had some questions about it, and I thought it would be really helpful to be able to put them all in one video, and that way you guys have all the answers to it as much as possible. So the first one I wanted to address was regarding the waterproofness. So if you guys have looked into my Instagram reels, I did a video on this actually, where I had written words and then I sprayed water on them, and then I used my finger to just like go over them, and they were able to stay good, which is amazing. Because sometimes you just have that fear that when you write an envelope with ink that it might smudge when it gets rained on. But if you had added water to this, would it still, remain its waterproofness? So thankfully, when I asked the manufacturer, the product can be diluted and it will still remain waterproof. But of course, it depends how much water you're going to put in there. For dilution, you can certainly go for much more than 10%. They're even saying like even to a 1-to-1 ratio. But I would say no matter what you do, you should, test it out, okay? Like make a little swatch, and when it's dry, take a Q-tip and wet it and smudge it over, or even use a spray bottle, spray it over the piece of paper, and then just see whether or not it will smudge at that point that you have diluted into. Because why would you dilute the inks? Sometimes you just never know, and you need to, you'll never know. You just might want to dilute it or add other colors to it and things like that, and just the ink becomes too thick to use and you want to add some water to it. People have also asked me, what kind of water do you need to put in it? So for water, you don't necessarily need to put distilled water as long as it's a clean water source like tap water, bottled water. Those are absolutely okay to do. So speaking of dilution, which is thinning out the inks, normally you would use water. But what if the ink is too watery? How do you thicken it? So you can certainly thicken it with gum arabic, which is what we normally would use for thickening up ink. You can also use a medium body acrylic gel or medium. I personally can get them at the art store. You might have to source it out, but personally for myself, I like the gum arabic option because I have them in the powder and I can slowly add to it. But if you are, playing around with a lot of your inks, I would say you can use the dropper bottle and put that in a small container, and then mix the inks there and test it out. Like you just don't want to mess up the entire bottle. But thankfully, because I had, we are using Dr. P.H. Martin's here for the inks. These are really, really well-made inks. Like they are so flexible. You shouldn't have to worry about getting them into trouble as well. And then in terms of mixing inks, mixing the Spectralite series, there's no issues with it because they are made of the similar components. You shouldn't have any issues with that. But again, if you wanted to test out mixing other colors, I would definitely, put the ink in another container, mix those inks together, just in case. You never know what kind of chemical reaction you're going to have by mixing these colors together. And also I wanted to say, just because when you guys, first receive your products, you might have noticed that there's some separation of the inks. Settling is very, very normal. They definitely settle over time, so a good shake for your use, especially if you haven't used it for a while. It could be a minute or two to really just get it well. And of course, you can get the ink and put it on your nib and then test it out and see whether or not it's already in the consistency that you like. Sometimes, like for example, like the Hunter Green one, I found that this particular ink does gunk up a little bit quicker than the other inks, and so that one I really shake it really well, even like twice as long as I do with the other ones. And I also can suggest from the manufacturer that to put in some mixing beads. So you sometimes when you are using like one of those correction pens, you can hear this like little sound in it when you shake it, and you hear these little beads in it. So those beads really help the agitation of your mixing, so you can add a couple of them into your paint bottle. You can use stainless steel ones as well, and that really helps with the mixing. And of course, it also is kind of fun to hear whenever you find issues with the ink being like too thick, or like it's just having that separation or some gunkiness happening to it. And with regard to using this calligraphy ink for other tools, like I definitely use these inks specifically for a pointed pen, but this ink, because it's liquid acrylic, you can also use it for other things like a brush, for example. But if you are thinking of using, fountain pens, most of the time this will definitely jam it up. Just because how thick this is, you might need to dilute it, and even so, it might still get stuck. So we don't really recommend using it for that purpose. There's really no, right or wrong way of using the Dr. P.H. Martin's products. Like there's a lot of ways there. It's a really, really flexible product, and with the dropper bottle, for example, I like to use that even to apply ink onto my nib. You could see some of the videos that I use all the time, that I do this often, and even in the previous video where the demonstration on these inks, that I can certainly have that kind of flexibility. One drop of color here like goes such a long way, and you can certainly do so much with it. I can't wait for you guys to do it, to get your hands on these inks and really use them. And also, if you have any questions at all about these inks, if you can put them in the comment box below, that way I can help answer them and help clear out those confusions and insecurities about a new ink that you haven't yet seen. All right, you guys, I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.